In part 2 of this lesson, we're going to talk about average rates. The big idea on this unit is that our interest rates are not stable. They change over time. And this is what happens when you invest in something like the stock market or mutual funds. The rate is not fixed for a 10-year investment. It's going up and down with the market. Let's say not over time, but over the course of our investment. In this case, I don't really care what it's doing every single month. I care what it's doing on average. And just so you know, there's lots of types of averages. When I talk about an average rate of return, I'm definitely not talking about taking all the numbers, adding them, and dividing by the number of rates, or the arithmetic mean. When you take statistics, you'll learn more about that. But here, what I care about is how much I get on average. So if I invested at that average rate, I want the same present value giving the same future value, or they are equivalent. So we're looking here at equivalent rates. As usual, the best way to learn a concept is to actually go through an example. So let's start with example number 5 from the lesson. Premium savings bonds have the following rates, all annual. In the first year, you make 2%. In the second year, you make 5%. In the third year, 12. In the fourth year, 15%. And by year 5, you're making 24% per year. And I'm just going to do an aside. These are exaggerated rates so that we can do the arithmetic easily, not because I know of an investment that pays 24%. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out how much a $1,000 investment would be worth at the end of the 5th year. And we can do this with $1,000, $100, anything, but the question says 1,000. So after 1 year, well, we start with 1,000, and after 1 year, we say 1.02 to the power of 1. That's how much money we have after the first year. Let's see how much that is. 1,000 times 1.02. So I've made $20 in interest. Okay, now let's look at that second year. In the second year, we make 5% interest. So I take everything I did before, I'm going to put brackets around it, though that isn't necessary, and I'm going to multiply that by 1.05 to the power of 1. So now I have 1530. I think I did that wrong, so I'm going to stop following along with the calculator right now. And now I'm going to say 1.12 to the power of 1. So this is the second, third, fourth year, 1.15. Finally, 1.24. So let's do the entire thing with the calculator. 1,000 times 1.02 times 1.05. Indeed, I had made a mistake there. 1 times 1.12. At the end of the third year, we have $199 in interest. Fourth year, we have $1,379. And finally, a whopping, let's put a 1 there, $1,710.52. And I'm going to leave this whole unrounded number. Okay, so that's how much money I have. That's my future value. And I'm going to write the whole unrounded number down because I'm going to use this in the next part. When we use things, it's best not to round them. Store 1. I like to put a 1 in square brackets to remind myself of where I stored that in my calculator. So now let's look at the average rate. The average effective rate is the rate I would need to get to that future value. So it's I where, let's look at this. If I take $1,000 and I go 1 plus I to the power of 5 years equals 1710, and I'm going to put in all those decimal points. This is solvable. All I need to do is use a fifth root, or 1 to the power of something to the power of 0.2. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the calculator because, as we've seen, that TVM button on our calculator is really, really useful. That's a V. Okay, N is 5 years. The rate is what I'm trying to do. It's effective, so 1. I start with 1,000 and I end with, remember this has to be negative, and that's so our equation can balance correctly. So let's go into that. And now I'm going to make this negative and put it straight into the future value. 1,000 is the present value. 0 is our payment. Our interest rate is what we're going to find. Make sure our PYCY is 1. Nice. And our N is 5. In that case, I worked backwards, but usually I work forwards. So let's compute IY, and we end up with 11.33%. So I averaged 11.33% on this investment. That means that on average, even though sometimes we were making 2% and sometimes 24%, had we invested at 11.33% for 5 years, we would end up with the same thing. So they're effective. Now I'm going to write down a bad idea. I'm going to write bad idea first so you don't get a still of this and end up with a mistake. 2%, 5%, 12%, 15%, 24%. Well, there's 5 years. We divide that all by 5, and what do we get? 11.6%. That is not the answer. It doesn't work that way at all. When we're talking about average rates, we're talking about a particular kind of average, a single number that is equivalent. We're not talking about the arithmetic mean or that type of average.